Good morning and hello. On behalf of Observer Research Foundation, allow me to welcome you all for this very special session on Korea India Trade Policy Partnership, where we have the pleasure today of hosting His Excellency Han-Koo Yeo, Minister for Trade, Republic of Korea. Today, of course, he's visiting India on a very important for a very important dialogue, and he has already had a very productive engagement with his India counterpart yesterday. And we are honored that he has agreed not only to deliver the ministerial dialogue today, but also to stay with us through the duration of the panel discussion. So we look forward to his views, comments, and observations as he's joined by a very distinguished panel later for the panel discussion. But first, let me invite Dr. Samir Saran, President ORF, for his welcome remarks to invite His Excellency for the ministerial address. Samir, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Pant. And indeed, it's a pleasure and an honor for ORF to welcome Minister Yeo Han-Koo, one of Korea's most important leaders, entrusted with perhaps the most important task today, which is to revitalize globalization, to ensure supply chains continue to operate, and indeed to shape the politics and regulations of the emerging digital age. It won't be an exaggeration to say that the last 2 years have been difficult for the global trade project. We have seen interruptions and disruptions caused by the pandemic. We are seeing a new rivalry begin to exert itself on some of the old assumptions around our economic models. And indeed, we are seeing the imperative of green transitions and the digital age begin to exert their own influence and demands on the global trading architecture and are beginning to certainly shape the Indo-Pacific region or the wider Asia-Pacific geography. Minister Yeo has clearly his task cut out. He has met his counterpart from the United States in the previous weeks. He has met his counterpart from India. And indeed, while the ministerial at the WTO could not take place, it is clear that leaders like him would need to shape the future of our politics and indeed our aspirations in the days ahead. Um, it may not be amiss to say that while Korea has been one of the most admired actors in India, and some of the Korean companies have been very influential in the sectors that they operate in this country, we still have lots to achieve in terms of the potential of a bilateral. And it is our hope that the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement will see the light of the day soon, because as someone wiser than me had once remarked, not having an agreement is indeed a decision not to have an agreement in these fast changing times. It is extremely important that we put together the pieces that will allow Korea and India, one of the most important countries of these Indo-Pacific region, to create a far more robust and intimate regulatory and economic relationship. His meeting with his counterpart, Minister Goel, yesterday, as far as the news reports are concerned, seem to be productive, and both the ministers have indeed reaffirmed the imperative of arriving at an agreement soon. And we at ORF would like to support the process and ensure that we could leverage the two dynamic economies for the benefits of the people of our countries, but indeed of the region. It gives me great pleasure today, this morning, therefore, to welcome one of the most important actors in this region in shaping the future of globalization, Minister Yeo Han-Koo, to deliver his opening remarks, and thereafter, of course, for her to take forward the discussions that we hope will give us ideas and indeed help us create a roadmap that could be both ambitious and productive for the near future. Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Samir Saran and distinguished panelists, good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. It's great to be here at the ORF, a world-renowned and prestigious think tank here in New Delhi. Let me also thank Dr. Saran the president of the ORF, and his staff for organizing this wonderful meeting and the distinguished presence of honorable participants this morning, including the Professor Harshi Pant, uh, the ORF Vice President Shamika Rabi, Ambassador Anil Wadua, and Professor Hyo-young Lee from Korea. Right before taking the office as Trade Minister, I served as the Secretary to the President on New Southern Policy, which, as we all know, underscores Korea's intent for intensification of our friendship with India. Naturally, a central focus of my tenure as Trade Minister is to make our bilateral partnership stronger, and I very much look forward to benefiting from your insight today. With that said, let me share my take and the outlook for our bilateral relations. As the largest democracy with the second largest population, India is the sixth largest economy in the world, with the GDP now estimated to be at around $3.1 trillion. Based on the special strategic partnership, Korea and India have been intensifying the bilateral relations, with President Moon's visit to India in January 2018, Prime Minister Modi's reciprocal visit to Korea in February 2019, and summit meeting in June 2019 on the margins of G20 Osaka Summit. With the support of the political impetus created by our leaders, our two countries have adopted the statement on a vision for people, prosperity, and peace in our future, established the Future Vision Strategy Group, agreed to accelerate the improvement negotiation for our CEPA, and to aim for $50 billion in our bilateral trade volume by 2030. In fact, the bilateral trade volume has continued to expand after reaching 20 billion in 2017, with more than 700 Korean investors and companies making substantial economic contributions together in India. The Korea-India CEPA has been at the center of our intensifying bilateral economic partnership. For the decade since our bilateral CEPA became effective in January 2010, bilateral trade, investment, people-to-people exchanges have multiplied by 2 or 4 times, respectively. Thanks to the CEPA, our bilateral trade has also recovered very quickly from the pandemic and reached a record high of $23.6 billion after an annual increase of 40.5%. I'm fully convinced that our bilateral economic cooperation will take a leap once again when the ongoing CEPA, the upgrade negotiations are concluded. With that said, let me share some thought with you on today's international trade scene and promising areas collaboration between Korea and India in 3 areas. First, collaboration for new trading order in the Indo-Pacific. As we continue to tackle ensuing challenges arising from COVID-19, the global trading landscape has been recently undergoing a rapid fundamental transformation or seismic paradigm shift. We are seeing a diversification of issues covered in trade, notably supply chain, digital, and climate change, but also including trade and technology, vaccines, and public health, and labor, just to name a few others. And we are also witnessing like-minded countries like Korea and India flocking together to team up for common interests and common values. With dynamism and much potential for growth, however, the Indo-Pacific region has been the center stage of regional economic integration and institutionalization of trade rules based on unwavering support and confidence for fair and free trade and multilateralism. In 2017, the Korean government has announced the new Southern policy with people, prosperity, and peace, namely the three Ps, at the center, and has been working closely with the new Southern partner countries, including India, to intensify economic relations through expansion of bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements, industrial and energy technology exchanges, infrastructure projects, and establishment of various G2G channels. Korea and India, in particular, have been accelerating the intensification of bilateral economic partnership based on the synergies of Korea's New Southern policy and India's Act East policy, as adopted by Prime Minister Modi in 2014. I strongly believe that our two countries must collaborate closely to ensure that various ongoing efforts towards a new trading order in the Indo-Pacific region deliver open, transparent, and inclusive trade platform as we witness the landscape change with the entry into force of CPTPP in 2018, the conclusion of RCEP agreement as the largest free trade agreement in the world and entry into force from early this year, and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework being developed by the United States. The Korean government has been working on building trust-based bilateral, multilateral partnership in the Indo-Pacific region through its participation in mega FTA such as RCEP, CPTPP, and we are also considering this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. We wish that India had joined the RCEP as a founding member, but very much hope to see India's participation as an economic powerhouse of Indo-Pacific sooner than later. In fact, personally, I also very much like to see India back into the RCEP as a former RCEP chief negotiator for Korea. We also hope to continue close consultation with India on emerging initiatives in the Indo-Pacific, such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as well as other trade issues relating to supply chain, digital trade, and climate change. Second, supply chain cooperation. In the wake of the outbreak of COVID-19, ensuring supply chain resilience has become more important than ever. Supply chain bottlenecks persist around the world as protectionist tendencies continue to spread with tightening linkages of trade and security. India has been promoting manufacturing and foreign investment through various initiatives, including Make in India and Self-Reliant India, with a view to becoming a center of these new global supply chains. The bilateral CEPA and the commencement of the Modi administration started to attract many Korean investors and companies into India, such as Samsung, Hyundai, Kia, and Hyosung, whose greenfield investment projects have been contributing substantially to local employment, production, and export. As a result, we are seeing a huge boost in our bilateral trade of raw materials and intermediate goods with a strengthening linkages, supply chain linkages across our two countries. After experiencing the recent shortages of diesel exhaust fluid or the urea and urea water, Korean government has renewed its focus on the stability of supply chains to avoid supply side disruption in raw materials and everyday commodity products. There is much potential for bilateral collaboration in supply chains with various manufacturing value chains established across our respective automotive, electronics, steelmaking, and chemical industries, as well as with India already being Korea's important partner in key raw materials such as petrochemical product, the naphtha, and aluminum and fine chemical products. Going forward, Korea strongly hopes to build a more stable and resilient supply chain with India, and ultimately a trade security partnership based on mutual trust, especially through our ongoing efforts for improving the bilateral CEPA. Last but not least, climate change and carbon neutrality collaboration. Climate change has become a trade issue, calling for urgent multilateral cooperation in recent times with accelerating efforts on the transition into green economy. Korea has been actively participating in the global climate efforts for carbon neutrality by enacting the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality in 2021 as the 14th country in the world and declaring an upgraded and very ambitious pledge for at the COP26 for its 2030 NDC objective to reduce its carbon emission by more than 40% compared to its 2018 level. Simply put, transition into clean energy, such as solar, wind, and hydrogen, requires multilateral ecosystem based on close international cooperation. I hope our two countries will take full advantage of a mechanism such as the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy to draw synergy from India's interest in renewable industries and Korea's momentum for clean energy transition. In addition, Korea and India must closely collaborate on multilateral venues such as TESD, TESSD at the WTO, and discussions relating to harmonizing emission trading scheme and carbon pricing in order to ensure that an individual country's climate change responses do not act as a new trade barrier as new climate regimes are emerging around the world with a heightened sense of urgency on taking action for climate change. I look forward to a productive discussion today, and thank you very much. 단와드 감사합니다.
Thank you, His Excellency, for a very forward-looking and a very ambitious agenda that you have laid out for India-South Korea relationship, and it's about time that this agenda is internalized by the two sides. As you rightly mentioned, the relationship has grown significantly over the last decade, in particular, as we saw the synergies emerging between New Delhi's Act East and South Korea's new Southern Policy Initiative. And your visit, in fact, has seen a new push for this bilateral economic engagement, as we hear reports that the new target of USD 50 billion before 2030 is being aimed at in bilateral trade, and by concluding the upgradation negotiations in CEPA in a time-bound manner. So we look forward to the accomplishments in that regard. And at a time of great geopolitical and geoeconomic flux in the Indo-Pacific that you have talked about so eloquently, India-South Korea engagement takes on an entirely new dimension with several issues that perhaps were not on the agenda a few years back, in fact, have bounced back on the agenda with much greater vigor and perhaps need to be pushed with equally great vigor by the policymakers. And as you mentioned, leadership is going to be critical in how we shape that agenda, whether it is a bilateral one focusing on India-South Korea trade and technology ties, or whether it's a multilateral one where we are looking at collaborating on platforms, whether it is a multilateral trade platforms or platforms like the WTO. So thank you, sir, for your very expansive and very, very interesting comments on how we can take this relationship forward. And now to discuss this and to discuss the geopolitical flux in the region, we have three distinguished panelists with us. uh, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, distinguished fellow with Vivekanand Foundation at the moment, and he had been Secretary East, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, where he had looked at this relationship very, very closely. We also have with us Professor Lee from the Korean Diplomatic Academy, we look forward to hearing her views from South Korea's perspective as to how South Korea looks at this emerging geoeconomic and geopolitical landscape from in the Indo-Pacific. So, Professor Huong Lee, warm welcome to you. And we have Dr. Pramesha Saha with us from Observer Research Foundation to look at the Indo-Pacific and India-South Korea relations. So, welcome to you all, and we are very glad that the minister is here with us as well. So, we would like to hear from His Excellency as well, as and when he feels like he wants to intervene and say and interject in some of the conversations. Ambassador Wadhwa, if I can begin with you, because Minister Yeo has laid out, as you heard him speak, a very, very ambitious agenda for this relationship, and we also know from our experience that while much admired, this relationship has not really achieved the potential that it should. Can you, given your part in policy making and given your vantage point, give us a sense of the trajectory of this bilateral relationship as it has evolved over the last decade, especially focusing on the economic aspect of this engagement? Ambassador Wadhwa.
Uh, Thank you very much, Harsh, and it's indeed a pleasure and an honor to speak in the presence of Minister Han-Koo Yeo. First of all, I'd like to say that the peace, people, and prosperity planks that you mentioned, of course, they form a bedrock now of our relationship. But focusing only on the prosperity part of the three P's, because trade and economic cooperation definitely will help contribute to each other's rapid economic progress and also recovery from the stress of COVID. And I think, as the minister rightly pointed out, the Republic of Korea's New South Policy Plus and India's Look East policy converge very well with each other. Now, currently, of course, as all of us have mentioned before, the both countries are focusing on the CEPA upgradation, which will help to further boost trade and cooperation between the two countries and also removal of non tariff barriers to trade. Unfortunately, in my view, this process has been on for far too long and needs renewed energy now. CEPA is just one aspect, of course, of the relationship. As Minister rightly pointed out, the disruption of the supply chains due to the pandemic has not only affected global trade but also brought home the importance of the need for diversification of our resource bases. And this, in my view, has created new opportunities for cooperation between the business communities from our two countries. And in this context, I just wanted to make six or seven short points. First is the population of 1.38 billion people and youthful demographics of India, which is a huge market, and India's consumption is set to increase to US dollars 4 trillion by 2025, making it the third largest consumer economy in the world. So the aspirations of India's youth are boosting the demand for smart gadgetry like mobile phones, TV sets, laptops, advanced electronics, etc. And not to forget the Indian government's program of e-vehicles. So the opportunities for Korean business are apparent in this context in India. Also, India has 700 million internet users, 1.18 billion mobile phone subscribers. So we can all imagine what this could mean for mobile hardware and services companies and for big data and computing. Related to this is the young population of India, and of course, the availability of IT skills and English language skills. I believe that Korean companies can leverage this wealth of Indian skilled professionals and technical manpower to enhance their own competitiveness. Secondly, India has realized, and as the minister would have heard from during his interactions here, the significance of developing an ecosystem to tackle global supply chain disruption to diversification, and is also trying to become globally competitive and become a part of this supply chain network. So, in this backdrop, India has started the production linked incentive scheme in different sectors. Of course, the main aim of this is to make the manufacturers globally competitive, also to advance and attract investment in areas of core competency and cutting edge technology, but more importantly, to ensure efficiency and create economies of scale, and then to enhance exports and make India an integral part of global supply chains. So here again, I believe the PLI scheme, especially in mobile manufacturing, in specialty steel, for instance, or electronic components and textiles, advanced chemistry, cell batteries, and very lately in the semiconductor area, often Korean companies a vast array of opportunities in the future to be part of this alternate global supply chain. Third is the launch of the National Infrastructure Pipeline in India for financial year 2020 to 25 in order to create some world class infrastructure in the country, again, in order to boost employment opportunities and also to make sure that the investment flows into the country continue unabated. And the projected investment is 1.4 trillion US dollars from 2020 to 2025. So these huge infrastructure plans that India has again offer a lot of opportunities for Korean engineering and consultancy companies to bring a combination of technology and finance for a win-win solution. Of course, Korean companies are aware of the Indian market, but I believe there is still some hesitancy amongst potential investors to enter India. And that's been in the past because India is not a single market, a country with multiple markets. Each state has its own advantages and clearances, etc. And also from the state government should require clearances. But in order to smooth this process, India has started the national single window system in digital platform to guide investors to identify and apply for approvals as per their business requirements. So, having said that, I'll just make three short points for the future. First of all, the 30 Indian startups that have attained unicorn status in 2021 are actually a call for a lot of other countries to team up with India in this field. Now, if you look at the figures, Indian startups received more than 10 billion US dollars in the 3 month period from June to September alone last year. And today, the startups in education technology, health technology, and fintech, they are all doing extremely well in India. And I believe that Korean startups and venture capitalists should collaborate much more with Indian startups in order to tackle the recent challenge for humanity and also take advantage of the already established India Korea Startup Hub, which had been set up with this aim of helping investors, incubators, and aspiring entrepreneurs and providing them with the necessary resources for market entry and global expansion. But I believe it would be useful for both countries to have a startup fund with equal contributions from both sides on a modest scale. The fifth point I wanted to make is for the fact that Republic of Korea is a global leader in some of the cutting edge technologies like 5G technology, big data, etc., artificial intelligence, and is definitely set to play a very important role in the post-COVID era. In fact, Korean government's new digital deal with an estimated budget of $60 billion is a reflection of Korea's commitment to further boost the digital economy and also to adapt to a fast changing world. Now, being founding members of the Global Alliance on Artificial Intelligence, I believe both of us can harness each other's strengths in the areas of technology and automation. And with the growing Indian prowess in software and Republic of Korea's strength in development and application of information technology, I see vast convergences which can be a force of global good. Sixth is the climate change issue, which Minister also referred to. which has now acquired an urgency with policymakers around the world. And recently, during COP26, our Prime Minister Modi had announced a goal of increasing our non fossil fuel capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. This has also opened up opportunities, I believe, for Korean companies to invest and to collaborate with Indian companies in this particular sector. Minister mentioned the green hydrogen mission, and here again, India has started this mission under which Korean companies should tie up with Indian companies manufacturing green hydrogen and also perhaps ship it back to Korea. Seventh is the issue of technological research collaboration between our organizations. And now India has opened up its defense sector for joint manufacturing, and two defense corridors in Tamil Nadu and Uttar Pradesh offer quite beneficial initiatives for foreign investments in the defense sector. Now, both sides have, of course, identified a number of areas for collaboration, but there are some new areas which have come up in the meantime, and shipbuilding between Indian shipyards and Korean ship building companies, space, nuclear energy are all areas of cooperation where we've not been able to explore fully our potential. Finally, the India Korea Future Strategy Group, which was referred to by Minister, which was set up in 2018. Now, of course, its aim is to promote bilateral cooperation in the fields of applied science and industrial technologies for promoting enhanced quality of life and sustainable development. The work is geared to focus on high end technological cooperation, standardization, and to develop mutual recognition agreements, as well as to provide IT services for Korean small and medium enterprises. It is here that I feel that we need to speed up our work because we've set up a number of mechanisms under this framework, like the Joint Network Center for self-sustainable ecosystem, for development of environmental cyber physical system. But of course, both countries must make use of this mechanism and try to focus much more on bringing commercial value out of the projects that will be implemented under the future strategy group mechanism. So let me stop there, and I'll be very happy to answer questions later. Thank you very much, Harsh.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa, for laying out, in some very specific suggestions on what can be the potential trajectory of India-Korea bilateral economic and technological relationship. And let me bring in Professor Lee now, because I think a lot of us would be interested in understanding from a Korean perspective, from where does India fit in when South Korea maps out or is mapping out its foreign policy and economic policy matrix. What factors have traditionally driven this engagement? And do you think in the post COVID, in the kind of changes that we are witnessing in the geoeconomic and geopolitical environment in the Indo Pacific, there has been a recalibration in Seoul about its strategic priorities and about the role that India potentially can play in not only bilaterally but also regionally? Professor Lee.
Uh, Thank you very much for inviting me to this very meaningful event. This is my first engagement with the ORF, the Observer Research Foundation, and I thank the Ministry of Trade and Industry and Energy for inviting me to this event as well. Thank you, Minister Yeo, for inviting me to this very prestigious event. I'm currently working at the KNDA, teaching future diplomats and conducting research on trade policy and economic governance issues, mostly from the multilateral perspective. So, excuse me first by saying that I'm not an expert on Korea-India economic relations, but I have been able to look again into the issues from the multilateral trade perspective on how we can work together, Korea and India, and also how we can use CEPA, the renegotiations, to by upgrading the bilateral agreement so that we can work better together in this changing trading environment. As many participants have already mentioned, and as the title of today's session well indicates, there is indeed a great transition that is taking place in our global trade environment today. And I don't think we need to emphasize what's going on, the new events that are happening. But I think that it is now clear that unlike in the past, trade and investment can no longer merely rely on economic values like efficiency or cost effectiveness. Nowadays, as you very well know, trustworthiness and resilience or security have become more important values, and the criteria, new criteria for engaging in trade and environment. And also due to the ever increasing tension between the US and China, geopolitical tensions, and the global economic downturn in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, I think that we all now agree that the Indo-Pacific region has become all the more important. This is not only because the region takes up nearly 60% of the global GDP, but it is also home to the fastest growing emerging economies in the world, including India. Therefore, this region where we both belong to is taking the lead in driving the world economy back to the path of recovery. And I think that a very important role will be the regional value chain in the Indo-Pacific region uh, will be playing a very important role in this aspect. So, having said this, the tasks that we may need to work together involve, first of all, strengthening of the regional value chain in the Indo-Pacific region, and I think CEPA will play a very important role in strengthening our regional value chains in this region. And to do this, a new important task would be to secure the trustworthiness of the technology suppliers in our ICT supply chain. And I think this is all the more important because China has a prominent presence in our region's regional value chain, and therefore we need to emphasize the importance of transparency and security as important elements to assess the trustworthiness of ICT suppliers in our region. And secondly, as Minister Yeo has mentioned, and as the president of ORF has also mentioned in his remarks, we need to ensure the resilience of our supply chains. And we need to do that by securing an efficient flow of inputs and outputs for the smooth RVC operations in this region. And in terms of bilateral efforts to this end, we all know that India is a major supplier of raw materials and resources and minerals in the regional value chain, while Korea is a major supplier of ICT technology-related products and components. So we have a very complementary relationship. And I think this is a good area of collaboration. And I think that in order to do this, we need to work further on reducing the existing trade barriers that are serving to restrict the resilience in the supply chains. So more precisely, we need to reduce or further eliminate the existing tariffs and duties on the related products, and also non-tariff barriers as well, such as domestic regulations need to be smoothened out or reduced so that our services can also benefit from increased trade and investment. So all in all, we need to secure the stable provision of inputs such as critical raw materials and resources, and also components for the technology-related products that are critical for domestic manufacturing sectors that are taking part in the RVC operations. And I think that I can emphasize more the importance of CEPA, and we need to utilize our CEPA, which recently our trade and commerce ministers have recently agreed to restart renegotiations as our framework for cooperation to facilitate trade in resources and ICT products and components. And thirdly, we also need to work on establishing a more robust digital infrastructure because nowadays, in the future, trade is anticipated to grow in the digital area, digital contents and digital related technologies are being developed in a very fast pace. And now we have various digital trade related rules that are being developed in the Asia Pacific region. And I think that experts who are very familiar with the digital trade area uh, are familiar with the how fast these rules are being developed regarding digital trade. We already have several trade agreements relating to digital trade, such as DEPA and DEA between Australia and Singapore. We recently have concluded DPA between with Singapore as well. We also have RCEP and many different platforms that are providing a fragmented diversified rules for digital trade. And I think India, we can help India to take part in this fast developing rules in digital trade by providing them with the technological assistance, or we need to work on that as well. And I think this is a good time for us to cooperate because Korea and India both have high capacity in respective areas. Korea is competitive in the hardware sectors, whereas India is competitive in the software, digital related technologies area. So I think we can work together on strengthening our complementary positions for strengthening our digital trade relationship as well. And lastly, we need to maintain the competitiveness of our regional value chains. And I think that we all know that the Asian regional value chain, one of the key competitiveness lies in its strong linkage with the global value chains, meaning we need to have strong linkage with the US and the EU markets to maintain our competitiveness. Because Factory Asia, the so-called Factory Asia, is serving as a major hub for the global value chains. And we need to maintain this competitiveness to be able to prosper in the future. And as part of that, I think it is very important as a future initiative to work together on reducing our existing reliance on carbon-intensive suppliers and ultimately take climate change into consideration in our RVC operations. So I'm not only talking about the US market, but as you all know, the EU has been taking up a very aggressive position and has been coming up with many policies that is considering more stricter environmental standards, and also using labor as a criteria in allowing access to the EU market. And I think that in order to maintain our competitiveness by maintaining a strong linkage with the GVC, we need to tackle with these demands. I think we need to respond more proactively to meet these pressing demands, or else we'll end up losing our linkage with the EU regional value chain, which I think will be very detrimental to our RVC competitiveness as well. And furthermore, as we all acknowledge, the need for global efforts to tackle climate change issues is an important task for all of us, not only collectively, but also individually as well. So although it may be painful in the short term, I think it will be beneficial and generate a win-win situation for all of us in the long term. And therefore, the CEPA renegotiations will also have to consider including a chapter on climate change or cooperation on environment issues for strengthening our future trade relations. So this is all for now. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Lee. And I think your focus on regional supply chains and what India and South Korea have done and should be doing is very well taken. And we'll come back to some of these themes once again in the second round. Dr. Saha, if I can come to you now, in the sense that a minister has talked about like-minded countries coming together and the need for, and I think in both Ambassador Wadhwa's comments and Professor Lee's comments, we heard this idea of how important it has become. The question of supply chain resilience or trade is becoming intricately linked with this perception of security, that mutual trust is very, very important. So when you look at the Indo-Pacific region today, India-South Korea relationship is one where you have two like-minded countries, whether it is the values, whether it is the democratic credentials of the two countries, or whether it is their approach to regional multilateralism. There is quite a bit of a synergy there. And when you look at the Indo-Pacific, you see also a lot of fragmentation. How do you situate India and South Korea relationship in that dynamic of Indo-Pacific, where a lot of contestation is happening, great powers are competing with each other, but also you have this phenomena of like-minded countries coming together and forming coalitions? Dr. Saha.
Thank you, Professor Pant, for that question. And it's a great honor for me to be a part of this panel and after a wonderful address by Minister Yeo. So, to answer the question on the Indo Pacific, I think it's very important when we have been speaking about the new Southern policy that Korea initiated in 2017. And I think while I was going through the document, the three main keywords that came across and which provides a rationale behind why this policy was initiated by South Korea. And I think the three key words were diversification, realignment, and rebalancing. And if you look at what this policy talks about, I think this is essentially based on development cooperation and economic cooperation. Given, as you mentioned, the great power competition and all the dynamic changes which are happening in the Indo-Pacific region, this policy very intelligently lays out development cooperation as the core pillar of enhancing and diversifying its cooperation with like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific region. And in that, obviously, the areas where Korea excels, ICT, technology cooperation, cooperation in the digital sector. Also, green energy is an important facet of this cooperation given the climate change issues which we are facing in the recent times. And I think this fits in very well with how also India, especially after the Galwan Valley clash of 2020, how India is also realigning its policies when it comes to dealing with the global supply chain. India is also looking at coming up with a supply chain initiative which is not predominantly driven by China. And given how South Korea is also looking to diversify its economic engagement, diversify its cooperation partners from previously not it was heavily dependent on US, Japan, China, but in the new Southern policy, the two target areas or the two target partners are India and Southeast Asia. This toes in very well with India's Act East policy, India's entire Indo-Pacific narrative, where ASEAN Centrality, Southeast Asia, East Asia, Oceania, for instance, Australia, New Zealand also fits in very well. So I think in those regards, both the countries have their priorities in which completely fits in this like-minded terminology that you brought up. But I think when we talk about the India South Korea cooperation in the Indo Pacific, also the areas of cooperation has already been laid out very. Uh, in detailed manner by the two previous speakers. But I think there is also a need to mention how these countries, how Korea is also trying to emerge as a middle power in the new Southern policy. I think another target which was, or another ambition which was laid out as emerging as a potential middle power security partner or an economic partner in the region. And I think that will bode in very well if they are trying to bring in countries from Southeast Asia, which are also striving hard and are caught in between this great power competition. So, providing a healthy alternative of economic cooperation, development cooperation, cooperation in digital sector, green energy, health sector, given the recent pandemic, would I think fit in very well in getting a good nod from countries in Southeast Asia and also India. Besides this, I think India in itself has come up with initiatives like Digital India Smart City Mission, where we are looking for enhancing digital, having the digital sector play a good role in the rural and underdeveloped areas. And I think in that, Korea can be a very reliable partner in that regard, given the global role it plays in digital cooperation. Besides that, also in the supply chain initiative, India, Australia, Japan already have an initiative in place, though it's in a very development and formative stage. But I think bringing in other countries from East Asia, especially Korea, and also bringing in other partners from EU. As my previous speaker rightly mentioned, how EU is also voicing its Indo-Pacific priorities. Especially after the new strategy which it has laid out. So I think bringing in more partners and moving beyond the Quad framework is also important. And in that, I think South Korea can figure very prominently in India's Indo-Pacific priorities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saha. And I think if I can come to you, Ambassador Wadhwa, because this is an important question. Professor Lee talked about, and we have been touching. You touched upon it in your initial intervention. Let's, if you can focus a bit on the FTA side of the equation, and we have been talking about CEPA. We know that the FTA was signed over a decade ago. We know, as the minister spoke, that trade has increased, it has bounced back, but so has the trade deficit. Both sides have committed themselves to renegotiating it in 2018, and during this visit of the minister, there is a commitment to expedite these talks. Now, when you look at the post-COVID environment today, how easy or difficult would it be for India and South Korea, for nations like us, to move forward in the direction that we are seeking? And can you also briefly situate this in the context of India's evolving approach to FTAs, because that has been a lot under discussion in the last few years? So can you briefly touch upon some of the dimensions of the FTA, and how India has been engaged with this, or grappling with this question, especially now that we are in a post-COVID environment where some of the assumptions have completely changed?
So, Harsh, I'll answer your question in three parts. The first part, of course, is the historical context of the CEPA upgradation. Obviously, the India Korea Free Trade Agreement was negotiated some time back. There is a lot of frustration in the Indian business circles about not being able to enter the Korean market because what they believe are non tariff barriers in certain areas, which have been outlined over time. And of course, both sides have striven quite hard to try and ameliorate that situation through governmental intervention, etc. But after all, it is at the business level that these issues need to be settled. So, unless the business to business dialogue takes place in a very frank manner, that input will not go into the governmental circles and the governmental negotiations. So every time there is a meeting like the ministers' meeting right now, which we've seen yesterday, the same issues are brought up again and again, but we haven't moved quite well on those. And because of that, obviously, Indian side has a grievance that the trade deficit is going up. They have their reasons to complain about that, but I think we can tackle that if we combine the business representatives of the concerned sectors together with the governmental negotiations. So that's my suggestion in this regard. It could be considered for the future. I believe in the change circumstances, and also this is the second part of my question, my answer, is that in the change circumstances, we've seen, of course, that India could not go ahead with this with the RCEP agreement, and India was a very serious negotiator right till the end, as our Korean counterparts would realize as well. We put in our arguments with all seriousness, but given the fact that we have um, a weakening of provisions in the RCEP on rules of origin in particular, and of course, given the problems that India has had with a huge ballooning trade deficit with China, that was an important factor in this decision not to be part of the RCEP for the time being. I hope that we can comply with the minister's call for India to rejoin the RCEP negotiations, because that's will definitely help both India and Korea and the other countries in RCEP going forward, if that can come about. But for that to happen, the Indian economy has to be confident that it will not be swamped by circumvention of rules of origin and unfair trade practices, which China has indulged in as far as India is concerned. We have that clearly that's a big concern for India. And third issue is about going in the way forward, which you talked about. I think the mindset in India has changed quite a bit after the pullout from RCEP, because we have serious negotiations on right now with countries like Australia, like Canada, United Arab Emirates, the European Union, United Kingdom, etc. And of course, we are talking about upgradation of the existing free trade agreements, not only with Korea but also with ASEAN. That those talks are also on. I understand that there would be some movement on these because the situation has changed as far as the Indian economy is concerned. There is a certain amount of demand which has been created in the Indian economy because of rising consumerism, rising aspirations of the young population and the middle class in India. And therefore, there are certain commodities which India normally imports, which we don't need to impose the high kind of tariffs which were there earlier. So therefore, India is more liberal and looking at these from a new perspective. Of course, from the Indian perspective, it would be good if tariffs are brought down in areas where we are traditional exporters to these economies, which is normal in any given negotiations. And that is what has happened with Australia. I know that we 97 commodities and tariff lines constitute about 98 or 97% of our total trade with Australia. So it's easier to focus on those and to make sure that we move forward in those areas. So something similar needs to be done in the India-Korea context as well. When we're talking about removal of non-tariff barriers, my first suggestion is to combine the governmental negotiations with the inputs from the business circles and the companies who are actually involved. And secondly, to make sure that we focus on the most important areas which are causing this pain and concern, and then proceed from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Professor Lee, if I can, tilt the focus to you now, because and the same question, because Minister mentioned this in his remarks about RCEP, and how his hope that India eventually joins, and Ambassador Wadhwa outlined some of the challenges there. So when, and given your expertise, given how how closely you look at the multilateral trading order, the RCEP and India's position on it at the moment, at least, is what it is. Now, given the challenge there, are there alternative pathways for boosting trade values that doesn't involve platforms like RCEP and CPTPP when it comes to India, South Korea? Or ultimately, we are going to circle back to this question of the present multilateral order. From your perspective, what can India and South Korea do, especially from the perspective of Seoul, that will bridge some of these differences and that will take at least some edge off this question of RCEP?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I think that India is a very important trade partner for Korea, and it is was quite a disappointment that India did not join RCEP, because it would have been a very important turn for boosting the bilateral trade relationship as well. However, as things stand right now, I think that we need to move forward with what we have and think about what further cooperation initiatives we can seek. And I don't think that I need to mention more on the importance of India in the Asian regional value chain, because India is a very prominent economic player in the Asian region. And with China now being under tremendous pressure by the geopolitical tensions, I think that India has a very big opportunity to perhaps take place or become an alternative regional hub in the Indo-Pacific region. And so I think India also may need to proactively think about how it can use this opportunity where China is under tremendous economic pressure under the current situation. I think In terms of FTA policy, the US and the EU in particular seems to be drifting away from using FTA as their trade policy tool. I think they're focusing more on reforming their supply chains, which I think is a very, very big paradigm shift. And I think for countries like Korea, which have been very reliant on FTAs for making for increasing its trade relationship with other countries, it's a very I guess uh, perhaps it's very difficult to grapple with the situation, and we need to also think about which direction we need to take in terms of our changes in trade policy direction. But I think that the situation of US and EU with other countries in Asia is very different actually, because while they are focusing on supply chain reforms, we need to notice that US is putting very much emphasis on policies like Buy America. And so while they are trying to reform their supply chain, they're also putting very important policies, domestic policies, to make sure that these supply chain reforms are working more advantageously for the domestic manufacturers. So um, I think that this is due to their asset, which is they have a very large market, very large, attractive import market, which many countries, all countries are trying to enter. And whereas countries like Korea or India, other developing Asian countries, don't have this kind of large, attractive market, which countries are trying to uh, make linkages with. So, for countries like Korea, smaller economies, developing economies, and mainly exporter countries, I think we need to have a different policy. And the policy, the trade policy, which is focusing on supply chain reforms, which is mainly led by US and EU, may be a direction that they may use to their advantage. But for us, I think we need to take a different stance. And I think that FTAs are still relevant for us because it can serve as an important economic cooperation framework. Maybe not in the same format as we used to have in the past, where we just focused on lowering trade barriers and making inroads into other markets, but we may need to think more about cooperative initiatives like in the digital trade area and the environment sector, or and many other new areas that are emerging as an important area of cooperation. And regarding your question about if there would be alternative ways to seek uh, as a cooperative framework, if we don't, if CEPA or FTA initiatives don't turn out to be as relevant for us, I think that we can start working on perhaps digital trade issues as a starting point, because digital trade is a very important area where we are starting to make new rules, and we are starting to have many companies that are making new products, and technologies are becoming very prevalent. And I think we need to have some kind of framework where we can enhance perhaps common standards or trustworthy criteria where digital companies or digital platform companies can help each other or make a win-win situation for both countries, because we have the high capacity in both hardware and software in terms of digital technology. So I think digital trade could be an area where we can start working together and move away from the sensitivities regarding FTA negotiations that we have faced so far. So thank you. This is all for now.
No, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I hope that's taken forward, because that's an area where governance is still being defined, and there are avenues available for countries like India and South Korea to take that leadership, especially given the contribution so far. Dr. Saha, if I can come to you briefly on you had raised this point about ASEAN centrality and how critical ASEAN had been in the supply chains, whether it is in the supply chain architecture or whether it is about looking at the security roadmap of the Indo-Pacific. When you see India and South Korea both engaging the wider Indo-Pacific, uh, how is ASEAN navigating this challenge, given that there is a great power rivalry that is shaping up, and given that the existing institutional frameworks are not working the way perhaps the smaller countries in the region expected them to?
Uh, yes, I had mentioned that India, through its Act East and also South Korea through its New South policy, both look at engaging with ASEAN in a big way. And when also countries are framing their Indo-Pacific policies and strategies, they mention the term ASEAN Centrality repeatedly in not only policy papers, in meetings, and all the joint statements, official statements which are released. But at the same time, I think I'll answer it in two parts. One is first how ASEAN is responding to this great power competition and how it is also diversifying its engagements in the region. And second is given that ASEAN as a sub-regional organization, there are questions about its viability and its how how ASEAN centrality is waning away. So how can India and South Korea and also other countries move around that? So I think to answer it in the first part is to how we are aware that ASEAN has been facing these issues right from the Cold War times of being stuck in the middle of great power competition. Uh, there is no unified stand when it comes to ASEAN as as an organization, how it is dealing with the US-China competition or even the great power competition. Yes, there is this voice which emerges that they should not be chosen, that they should not be forced to take sides. But again, most countries have differing stand on how they are dealing with the US-China issue. There are countries like Indonesia, Malaysia who are very clearly hedging, but there are countries like Philippines, Vietnam who are welcoming outside countries like US and even EU to India to play a bigger role in the region. So there is this differing stand, and there is Cambodia, Laos, Brunei who are so economically dependent on China that even if they want, they can't sort of take a stand, and they are forced to bandwagon with the Chinese narrative. But at the same time, given ASEAN's economic framework and also in the ASEAN master plan, which is there, they do have an economic policy, economic cooperative framework which has been laid out, in which it is clearly mentioned that ASEAN also needs to diversify its partnerships, its economic partnerships, to fulfill the huge infrastructure and the economic deficit which this region faces. To fulfill that infrastructure gap in terms of the billions of dollars there is, it is aware that it has to depend on other countries like Japan, other countries like EU, US, Australia to fill in that gap. And that is where also India and South Korea can come into being, because because South Korea has very clearly mentioned that it is looking at functional cooperation, issue based cooperation, and in that it is not fancying itself to play it is fancying itself to play as a middle power in this region. And I think that will actually go well with how ASEAN perceives in bringing in diversified partnerships. But again, then this question of ASEAN as an organization, given how the challenges that it is facing, I think one needs to understand that there is a need to move beyond looking at Southeast Asia from the purview of ASEAN. The geography of this region, the potential of this region needs to be taken into account. When we are talking about the predominance of ASEAN, one has to understand the predominance of Southeast Asia as a region. Southeast Asia is a market to the entire Indo-Pacific geography or the Indo-Pacific debate that we come in. And in that, I think India, South Korea, there is this recognition among all the countries that as a geography and as a market and as a as a growing economic hub, Southeast Asia is important in this narrative. And that is why I think when it comes to digital, as Professor Lee very rightly mentioned, digital trade, or even in terms of digital technology cooperation, in terms of, there are many countries in Southeast Asia which are also looking at smart city network. Singapore is a leading partner in coming up with these smart city projects. So aligning with countries like Singapore, India and South Korea can work along those lines also. So there are ways to engage with ASEAN beyond just the glaring strategic issues which this country faces. And there are economic sectors like the smart city, digital, vaccine drives, where India, South Korea can together play a role. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sahan. Before I ask His Excellency if he wants to intervene, Ambassador Wadhwa, a quick question to you on technology cooperation. We know that technology is going to drive international politics. We are looking at the fourth generation technological evolution. There are various areas that we have been talking about, and South Korea is a world leader in many of these technologies. And when you look at the technological fragmentation, when you look at issues like semiconductor industry, for example, uh, what are the ways in which one needs to tap these opportunities, both when it comes to India South Korea bilateral engagement, as well as when you look at the larger regional fragmentation, how two economies like India and South Korea can work together more productively towards achieving some of the targets there.
So, Harsh, I think bilaterally, India and South Korea have a number of mechanisms which are already in place, so that these can be utilized for getting the technologies together, especially in the areas that there is a demand in both economies. Of course, the South Korean technological setup has been extremely successful in the cutting edge technologies. And I mentioned when I was speaking that Korea has this new digital deal which has got funding of $60 billion. So that's a commitment that Korea has to boost the digital economy and also to adapt to the fast changing world. In India, of course, we are engaging similarly on a path of high technology growth. And combined with the demands that the issue of climate change has created for us, the e mobility program that India has embarked upon, and the transformation in the rural areas in India, which is relying more and more on digital technologies. I believe Korean and Indian companies can definitely step up that work through the existing mechanisms. I don't think we need to replicate anything over there. But as far as collaboration on the international scene is concerned, during this discussion, we very interestingly also talked about how Korea can work with countries like Australia and Japan on resilient supply chains. Now, that's an area which is incidentally also focusing very much on digital trade to begin with. And it is here that since Korea is already working with Singapore, that we could combine our forces, and perhaps Korea can act as an additional partner in this respect. That's something which we can definitely think about as far as expansion of this group is concerned, and create a body of like-minded countries which can concentrate on the emerging technologies in order to enhance trade in the absence of the free trade agreement like RCEP that India is not part of.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Can I now invite His Excellency Minister Yeo for his comments, observations on the discussions and some of the things that we have talked about over the last hour or so, and again to give us his concluding statement. His Excellency, over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists. I enjoyed this very stimulating, insightful discussions very much, and I learned a lot from all of you. With these new perspectives and so on. Um, I think while the listening to all these the comments, I think three words came up to my mind that describing the Korea-India these bilateral relations. First, complementary. Second, interconnected, and then third, the win-win. I think what all of these panelists mentioned really indicate that our industry or this economic structure are complementary to each other. And then also when we look at the Korean investment in critical industrial sectors of India, that shows that our supply chains are being more and more interconnected in these critical industries. And also, obviously, with this CEPA and all the other, the cooperation initiative, I think we can really develop these bilateral relations into win-win, the relations going forward. With that, also, I'd like to briefly touch upon this trade deficit because yesterday with Minister Goyal, I had a very, the constructive and the very frank discussion on how we look at this trade deficit. And also, as some of you mentioned, this the difficulty that businesses from both countries are facing in entering into each other's market, and some of you describe it as a sort of frustration. I think that we are managing this 20 billion trade relations, and I think in reasonable sense, it's in a way natural that we face this kind of implementation issues in each other's countries. I think Korea has 58, the 18 FTAs with 58 countries. And with whatever partner countries, we face this kind of implementation issues. So with the same, likewise with the United States. But I think what matters is not the fact that businesses face this kind of difficulty. What matters is how we could solve, how we could identify those business irritants, businesses facing in each other's country, and how we could make use of this framework that we have, CEPA framework we have, in a way to resolve in transparent and fast and amicable manner. So I think that's what matters. But after I arrived here yesterday, I had a very fortunate opportunity to meet with business leaders in India, and also business leaders doing business, Korean business leaders doing business in India. And what I found that each side has some issues, obviously, and then so I realized that. Yeah, of course, each business has very specific perspective on how they look at this specific difficulty they are facing. But also, it's important for us to look at in a broader picture. And then, so what I realized that is that maybe we need more people-to-people contact or business-to-business contact to really enhance mutual understanding of how business is working in each country and how they could find this constructive way to address those issues they are facing. So actually, that is was my observation after interacting with these business leaders from both countries in India. And also, as I mentioned, we discussed the trade deficit. I'm aware, aware that many people in India are concerned about this trade deficit with Korea. I think Korea also, throughout our, the 70 years of economic development history, we faced this kind of trade deficit issue with certain countries in the region or outside the region. I think what is important is not the fact of this trade deficit itself, because as all these economists are aware, this trade deficit is outcome of this, this macro and microeconomic, the interaction. It doesn't. It's not the single most important criteria for judging the healthiness of this bilateral trade or investment relation. And so, what matters is the the dissect this trade deficit, where it is coming from, why it is happening, and how it can be addressed. But from Korea's perspective, we look into this trade deficit, what the structural issue is. And what I found is that it is really linked with investment. I'll explain. So let's say, Korean companies make big investment in India, and obviously manufacturing sector, so it needs this, supply chain. And overnight, we cannot create this local value chain or supply chain in India. So they have to bring in or source some of the parts or intermediate the sophisticated parts from Korea or from other countries. So when we look at this trade deficit figure, 80% of Korea's export from Korea to India, 80% is intermediate goods. It's not finished products. If it's a finished product, then it means that it is kind of cannibalizing, or it is kind of crowding out some other the finished product in a domestic market in India. But 80% of our export to India are sort of intermediate goods, which means that it is a sort of input to the display. I mean, this mobile phone, or the automobiles, or chemical things like that. So we see that that the analysis incorporating this trade as well as investment can really capture the real picture of what is happening in this bilateral trade investment between two countries. Of course, Korea is willing to discuss all these matters under the framework of this ongoing upgrade CEPA negotiation. How each country can address these irritants or some implementation issues that each business sectors are raising, and also how can we address this trade deficit or some investment the issues that each business sectors are facing. So we will put everything on the table and then accelerate the pace of the negotiation. Minister Goyal and I agreed yesterday that we need really new spirit, new energy, new impetus into this negotiation, and really accelerate the pace of negotiation. And also, we agree that this our leaders' ambitious target of reaching 50 billion, the trade by 2030. But also, we agree that it doesn't necessarily have to be 2030. Why don't we just accelerate the target date into a few more years? And I think that it's very, very possible and feasible when we look into how fastly this global trade as well as this bilateral trade relations are changing. So that's my more kind of bigger picture comments. And also, I think this uh, ambassador the mention what do I mention this some of the sectors that we haven't really paid attention to yet, which is this the startup and venture businesses. I think this is a great areas for future collaboration. Indian young entrepreneurs are very the creative and very entrepreneurial. Korean counterpart are also very dynamic and up and coming. So I think there's a big areas for collaboration if we encourage some sort of a framework. I think the startup funds you mentioned could be one of the useful way to look into. So that areas for Korea also, about 5 years ago we had two or three unicorn company. In 5 years, it grew to like 17, unicorn company. And I went to Singapore the last month, and we concluded this digital partnership agreement between Korea and Singapore. Why not with India? I think we could incorporate this into the CEPA negotiation, or we could explore some different avenue. But I think this digital partnership between two countries could be very, very promising and complementary. The India is a leader in the software and all this, this IT engineering. Korea is also has cutting edge technology in all these this ICT sector. So digital venture, the startups. I think that could be, in particular, the interesting and promising areas for future collaboration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your address. And thank you for staying with us through the duration of the panel discussion. And then also, of course, taking some points, some very interesting issues around, startups and digital engagement that we have raised today. Hopefully, that will make it way through the policy process and through the policy making apparatus. But I think the most important point that you made, which is, I think, very on a very optimistic note, we can perhaps end, that it is about leadership, it is about solving problems, it is about being pragmatic and resolving the challenges that the two nations face as they embark on a very ambitious economic and trade and technological partnership for the 21st century. With that, His Excellency, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you to Ambassador Wadhwa, Professor Lee, and Dr. Saha for being with us for the panel discussion. And thank you all for joining us today. Thank you once again.